For our last talk of the day, we have Lilly Ryan, our final invited speaker, with a magical presentation. Please make Lilly feel welcome.
Welcome to Django Against the Dark Arts. Are there any Gryffindors here? Okay, there's one up the back, just one. Ravenclaws. This includes me. Any Hufflepuffs? Okay. Slytherins? Cool. All right. I'm not going to wear this the whole time because it's going to get really distracting for me. But we'll deal with that. Okay. So today's curriculum is an introductory class into getting into the mindset of Lord Voldemort so that we can write better web applications. This is a topic which I think we will agree makes perfect sense. Yes? Okay, good. So, I'm Lilly. I'm also known as Atticus. You can find me on Twitter at Atticus_AU. And I'm a penetration tester from Melbourne, working for a security company called Assurance. They were kind enough to help me get here today. And if you want to know more about us and what we do, you can come and find me afterwards. I'm also someone who enjoys a good analogy. So as a former historian, I've spoken about software and tech-related topics and concepts by telling stories about things like undersea telegraph cables, horror movies from the 1920s, stage magic, and poison. Again, all things that make perfect sense. So today, I'm going to use the story of Harry Potter to talk about web application security because it seemed like a fun thing to do, and I have always wanted an excuse to wear robes on stage, damn it. Like, look, robes. Okay. It's a pen tester's job to think as malicious internet users do. Talks on how security vulnerabilities work and how to mitigate them often pack in a lot of technical detail, but understanding security concepts doesn't have to start there. It doesn't even have to be about software. We can learn a lot about app security by imagining that we're fighting evil wizards, because the basic concepts are almost exactly the same. We're going to look at this by analyzing how Professor Albus Dumbledore, the headmaster of Hogwarts School, and widely recognized as pretty good at magic, thought about and constructed defenses around various important places and objects in the books. Then we'll look at how Lord Voldemort, aka the bad guy, approaches his own security and examine the difference between the two wizard security practices and see what we can learn from both of them when it comes to Django. If you're not familiar with the Harry Potter books, I will do my best to explain things as I go along, but you are also welcome to step out of the talk and read the books and come back to this recording later if you like. We don't all read the same books, it's fine. Please be warned, though, that this talk will contain spoilers for all of the books. I've chosen 3 security case studies for us to look at in order to pick apart Dumbledore's defense methods. These are the guarding of the Philosopher's Stone in the first book, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, the security mechanisms around the Goblet of Fire in the 4th book, Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, and the defenses around the house located at number 12, Grimmauld Place, London, in the 5th to 7th books of the series. Let's start with an analysis of how the Philosopher's Stone was defended. The Philosopher's Stone is a shiny stone with magic powers that the good guys have. Lord Voldemort wants the stone because it will help him kick his evil goals. Dumbledore is tasked with protecting the stone from Lord Voldemort because he is very good at magic. He decides to do this by getting a bunch of his staff members to set up a series of 7 defenses in front of the stone in sequential chambers behind a classroom door and a 3rd-floor corridor at Hogwarts. The 7 defenses are, in the order that they're encountered by anyone trying to reach the stone, a 3-headed dog guarding a trapdoor, a murderous plant called a devil's snare, a room full of flying keys, a giant enchanted chessboard, a literal troll, a table with 7 potions and a logic puzzle on it, and a magical mirror called the Mirror of Erised. So by layering a bunch of different defenses on top of each other to protect his sensitive content, in this case, the stone, Dumbledore's using the strategy of defense in depth, which is multi-layered defense strategies that work together to protect sensitive information. Liam O gave a talk on this in the security track earlier today, which goes into more detail on this topic, and I would recommend that you watch it. So anyway, defense in depth is an established security pattern. But how well was this pattern implemented when it came to protecting the Philosopher's Stone? Firstly, a few of these defenses are things that are broadly classed as physical defenses. These are the three-headed dog, the devil's snare plant, and the troll. They act just like locked doors and giant walls with spikes on top of them. They're meant to put off opportunistic attacks and buy the defenders some time. However, they're also supposed to be difficult to penetrate. This is not the case for any of the defenses that are used here, which all have widely known vulnerabilities and bypasses. The three-headed dog is fierce and scary, but it also goes to sleep whenever it hears music. This is common knowledge because the dog's owner, Hagrid, has terrible OPSEC, and he told pretty much everybody. The devil's snare is a plant that will bind you tightly to stop you from going anywhere, but it also recoils in the presence of light, which is a common fact that you can read in wizard textbooks for 11-year-olds. So if you bring a zipper or a wand with you, you're pretty set. The troll is a troll. It doesn't bathe, isn't very intelligent, it probably says hurtful things on the internet. It's also vulnerable to becoming unconscious if it's hit on the head really hard. Also, if it's knocked out, the troll doesn't reset itself or get replaced with a fresh troll. So, after Voldemort and his henchmen knock it out, when Harry, Ron, and Hermione find it, it is still knocked out, and they can just walk around it. Your defenses should not ideally be one use only, especially if there's nothing else reinforcing them at the same time. Finally, before you even get to this set of chambers full of allegedly dark wizard-grade magical defenses, the whole thing is protected by a wooden door in a frequently used corridor, and it opens with a very basic unlocking spell, which they also teach in class to 11-year-old wizards. It's so simple that our protagonists actually end up in this room by accident once. You don't want to implement defenses that can be breached because an 11-year-old panicked. Also, the books are filled with portraits that enforce magical passwords. Why one of these wasn't used here is completely beyond me. Anyway. Next, we run into a common pattern that's designed to stop attackers by being just annoying enough that most people will give up and go away. This is done by treating sensitive information like a needle in a haystack. It's also known as security through obscurity. The info's right there, but it will take patience to go through everything to find it. You see this kind of thing a lot on the web, where apps will make sensitive information or documents, endpoints, public, but then give them weird names and hope that nobody will spend the time to try lots of different combinations to find them. This is a commonly used method for hiding sensitive information because it's cheap and easy to implement, but it's also not a very strong defense, and it has some easy bypasses, as you are about to hear. We can see this pattern used in the case of the room full of flying keys, and also in the case of the final defense, the Mirror of Erised. Harry, Ron, and Hermione are able to access the flying key that opens the door to the next chamber by spotting it amongst the other keys that are flying around, and then using a broomstick to grab it. They fly up and grab it. And because the room contains multiple broomsticks, it allows for multiple threads of attack to run at the same time, because more than one person could be in the air looking for the key at any point. There's no rate limiting in place here at all. In fact, multiple simultaneous attempts are explicitly supported because the room has a bunch of extra broomsticks just lying around. As a defender, this doesn't make much sense. It's the same thing with the Mirror of Erised. The mirror contains the Philosopher's Stone, the big MacGuffin that everybody wants, but it will only release the stone to somebody who wants to find it, but not use its powers. Voldemort and his henchmen can't get the stone out of the mirror because they want to use it. But Harry can get the stone out of the mirror because he just wants to find it in order to stop Voldemort. Ironically, Harry would have achieved his goal much more easily if he hadn't gone after the stone at all, because it was his presence in the room that allowed the stone to be released from the mirror. And once it was out, the bad guys tried to grab it from him. It was only Dumbledore turning up at the last minute that, stopped anything, like a server admin SSHing in to do a last-minute patch and prod kind of thing. And in the same way, there wasn't any rate limiting on this mirror. Theoretically, Voldemort could have grabbed the mirror, taken it out of the chambers, and then set it up, maybe in Diagon Alley or something, I don't know, and then have a whole bunch of people look into it until one of them fulfilled its conditions. They wanted to find the stone, but not use it. And then he could have hit them over the head with a brick. Taken the stone. Just saying. Our last type of defense in front of the Philosopher's Stone is what amounts to a couple of CAPTCHA tests. So CAPTCHA stands for Completely Automated Public Turing Test to Tell Computers and Humans Apart. And it usually looks like a bunch of warped text, or more recently, it gets you to train self-driving cars. It's supposed to be a task that only an attentive human would be able to complete in order to stop a bot or a script from using the feature that it's protecting. These CAPTCHA-style defenses are the Enchanted chess game and the logic puzzle with the potions. The Enchanted chess game is just a game of chess, except all the chess pieces are animate and will knock you out if you're standing in for the piece that gets taken. Knowledge of how to play chess is not secret. It's just a task that takes time and it takes concentration to complete. It slows you down a little bit, but it doesn't guarantee that you'll be stopped from getting to the other side. In the same way, the logic puzzle with the 7 potions isn't something that can be brute forced easily. First, you have to solve the logic puzzle to determine the contents of each of the bottles of potions. You get one chance to drink the potion out of the lineup that allow you to either go forward to the next chamber or back to the previous one, so you need to make sure that you've made the right choice. And if you're thinking you could just drink them all and YOLO your way through, one of the bottles contains a poison that will kill you, so it's not a good strategy. This task, like the chess game, is designed to make sure that the person thinks about it, but it isn't designed to be all that difficult. Both of these things are also designed to take time. You can't just run through the room to the next thing. You are forced to stop and engage on an intellectual level with what's going on. Obviously, if you implement a defense that takes time to bypass, you give yourself more time to respond to an attacker. On the other hand, these defenses aren't all that difficult to bypass. All the information that's needed to get past them is either common knowledge in the case of how to play chess, or it's right there in front of you in the case of the logic puzzle. And much like real CAPTCHAs, these things are incredibly annoying, especially when you have to deal with them on your way in and you're a legitimate user. The main point of employing defense in depth is to ensure that you have some time. You buy time to respond to an attack if you're a defender. The main downfall of all of the above mechanisms is that you can't buy time to respond to an attack if you don't even know the attack is happening, which is exactly the case with the Philosopher's Stone. There's no useful logging, monitoring, or alerting going on here at all. None of these things. No ghosts running around the hall screaming that someone broke into the room on the 3rd floor corridor. There's no owls showing up to deliver messages to the wizards that are on call. The ridiculous thing about this is that we know that the wizarding world has access to spooky levels of monitoring and alerting, because anytime an underage wizard does magic outside of Hogwarts, they get an owl with a letter about it immediately, like right down to the timestamp and the name of the spell that was performed. This happens to Harry Potter at the start of the Chamber of Secrets, at the start of The Prisoner of Azkaban, and at the start of the Order of the Phoenix. Later in the books, Voldemort also gets alerts every time somebody says his name, which I'm guessing is where Google Alerts got the idea. I don't know. For Dumbledore, not to have implemented anything like this is a serious oversight in the protection of the Philosopher's Stone. Just because he turned up right at the end to save Harry from being killed by Lord Voldemort, it doesn't make him a hero. It just makes him kind of a negligent ops engineer who got lucky. Dumbledore should have been waiting for Voldemort before he even got past the first room. Not to mention that because of this design, the design we had before, he had to fight past all his own defenses in the same way in order to get to the stone, just like any old attacker, which doesn't seem like the most efficient way to do things. So, scorecard for the defenses on the Philosopher's Stone. Maybe a 4 out of 10. Okay attempt at using defense in depth, but it uses multiple known vulnerable defenses, and it's severely let down by a lack of monitoring and alerting. Let's move on to look at the Goblet of Fire. Yeah, it's a goblet of water. The Goblet of Fire is a magical cup with the job of deciding which students will compete in the Triwizard Tournament, which is an inter-school magical competition. It appears in the book Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. Students can write their name and their school on a slip of paper that goes into the cup, and the submissions are open for 24 hours, and then there's a ceremony where the cup will return the names of one candidate per school, and then these candidates are bound to compete in the Triwizard Tournament. it was decided that the only students who could compete in the Triwizard Tournament had to be aged 17 or over because the competition was so dangerous. The only other rule for selection of the candidates to the Goblet was that there should be only one candidate chosen per school. So traditionally, 3 schools compete in the Triwizard Tournament, hence the name, 3 candidates. The plot of the Goblet of Fire revolves around the fact that 14-year-old Harry Potter is mysteriously chosen to be the 4th Triwizard champion. How this happened when Harry was under the age of 17 and a champion from his school had already been selected is revealed at the end of the story. And I'll dig into the vulnerabilities that are exploited there in just a second. Firstly, let's have a look at the Goblet's configuration and security settings. We aren't given much information about how the Goblet makes its decisions about Triwizard candidates, but we do know that Dumbledore put one defense mechanism in place around the Goblet, an age line. This was supposed to stop anybody under the age of 17 from entering the space and putting the paper with their name into the Goblet. The age line is a literal line on the ground, can only be crossed by people aged 17 and over. Otherwise, there's nothing to stop anybody at all from approaching the Goblet, which is left unguarded for 24 hours in the middle of the Great Hall at Hogwarts. No monitoring and alerting, it's fine. Dumbledore said he did this to ensure that no underage student yields to temptation. But people try to bypass this control mechanism almost immediately. In the 24 hours it's open, we learn that 4 students try to trick the age line by taking an aging potion to make themselves several months older. This doesn't work, and the spell throws them out of the ring immediately. A successful age line bypass is made on behalf of Lord Voldemort by Barty Crouch Jr. in disguise as Mad-Eye Moody. It makes sense if you've read the book. Anyway, that's one of the Hogwarts teachers. He enters Harry Potter's name into the Goblet and is successful at having Harry chosen as the 4th Triwizard Champion, which is part of Voldemort's evil plan for that year. So, Crouch circumvents the protections on the Goblet in 2 ways. Firstly, Crouch himself is over the age of 17. There's nothing in the books to say that a person over the age of 17 couldn't enter someone else's name into the Goblet. It's not clear if any of the other students tried this, but if they did, they weren't chosen, so we don't know about it. Going on what we do know about Crouch's hack, the age line was only checking if the person who crossed it was over the age of 17. It didn't check if that person was adding their own name to the Goblet or someone else's. The authorization of app requests is important, especially when those requests are making changes to a database. The Goblet didn't have any kind of authorization or authentication protections whatsoever, which is a serious oversight. Secondly, Crouch uses a confundus charm on the Goblet to trick it into thinking that there is a 4th competing school in the competition and that Harry Potter belongs in that school. Because Harry Potter is the only candidate for the 4th school, he's chosen to compete in the Triwizard Tournament. There also don't appear to be any data injection defenses on the Goblet at all, or if there are, they're not very strong ones. If the Goblet had validated the names of the schools that were submitted against its own known list of schools, it may have been more likely to reject the presence of a 4th school, and then Harry wouldn't have been guaranteed to be chosen. Also, the data that was entered into the Goblet should have been sanitized before it was added by the Goblet, and then again for bad data before the final vote was run. This could include stripping out data with the names of bogus schools, as well as matching and removing names that corresponded to students that were under the age of 17. So, the long and short of this is that you should never trust user input into your app or your Goblet of Fire. Your user might be legit, or they could be submitting post requests on behalf of Lord Voldemort. Scorecard for the defenses on the Goblet of Fire, 2 out of 10. The age line worked against some basic attacks, but without authorization and authentication, and without validating user input, it was vulnerable to data injection and the plots of evil wizards. For our last case study, we will examine the protections that Dumbledore placed around number 12 Grimmauld Place in London. This address is the house of Harry Potter's godfather, Sirius Black. For a few years, it acted as the headquarters of the anti-Voldemort activist group, the Order of the Phoenix. Because of its status as Order HQ, the house became a target for dark wizards pretty much immediately. Lots of prominent members of the Order that included Dumbledore and Severus Snape and Harry Potter were known to spend time there. This made it pretty important to defend properly, so the Order looked to its leader, Dumbledore, to harden the configuration of the house as much as possible. The main defense that number 12 had going for it was the Fidelius charm, in the words of one of the Hogwarts teachers. The Fidelius charm is an immensely complex spell involving the magical concealment of a secret inside a single living soul. The information is hidden inside the chosen person or secret keeper and is henceforth impossible to find, unless, of course, the secret keeper chooses to divulge it. The secret in this case was the location of the headquarters of the Order of the Phoenix. Dumbledore was the secret keeper for this particular spell, which effectively meant he was the only one who could tell someone where the headquarters was. Once someone else knew about it, they were unable to pass that knowledge on, even if they were tortured or coerced. The main problem with this protection is that the Fidelius charm has a single point of failure. That's the secret keeper. That person has to be the one to tell everybody who needs to know the secret. However, Harry Potter learns about number 12 Grimmauld Place because Dumbledore writes the secret down on a piece of paper and hands it to someone else, who then passes it to Harry. This is an extremely insecure method of transport. This note could have been accidentally dropped and read by anyone. It was in plain text. The information on it's only kept secure after Harry reads it because the note's set on fire by the person who gave it to him. If they hadn't done that, presumably the note could have been handed around any number of people and the secret could have been shared multiple times. Dumbledore clearly had not heard about transport encryption. The other problem with the secret keeper method of keeping number 12 safe is that when the secret keeper dies, anybody who was told the secret automatically becomes the secret keeper themselves. The Order of the Phoenix runs into this problem after Dumbledore dies. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, the protagonists explicitly have to deal with the fallout from this. Mr. Weasley had explained that after the death of Dumbledore, their secret keeper, each of the people to whom Dumbledore had confided Grimmauld Place's location had become a secret keeper in turn. And as there are around 20 of us, that greatly dilutes the power of the Fidelius charm. This is not entirely... This is not entirely unlike somebody quitting their job and checking the AWS keys into Git at 5 p.m. on their last day. Shared keys are weak keys because the more people who know the secret and the more machines that store it, the more likely it is that someone unauthorized is going to obtain the secret and use it to mess up your whole operation. In the worst case, if this happened to a software key, we could revoke the original key and rotate it to a new secret value. However, the Fidelius charm doesn't appear to have the concept of key rotation. There's no way to undo the secret keeper spell unless everybody who knows it dies or the house that it applies to gets knocked down. This is pretty much the equivalent of getting hacked and throwing your hands up and buying a new domain name and starting over. Also, we learn over the course of the last few books that Dumbledore strongly suspected that he was going to die soon. Knowing this, he still set himself up as a single point of failure for the safety of the headquarters of the anti-Voldemort movement. This is a jerk move. No points to Gryffindor. If you know that you're going to leave a project and you're a decent person, you don't make everything depend on your keys and then weaken them all with no alternatives and no backups. You do handovers. You plan for disaster recovery scenarios. And if you're actively at war with literally Lord Voldemort, you don't just leave everybody to scramble to find a new headquarters if you die, unless you're a jerk. Yeah, I'm calling Dumbledore a jerk. I give this method 0 out of 10. No disaster recovery options. Secrets can only be transmitted insecurely. Keys can't be revoked. Nonsense. All right, so if Dumbledore, thinking like a good wizard, was unable to get into the mindset of a dark wizard, how do they think? And how does that help us do better? Let's compare the previous case studies to Voldemort's security model. Before the start of the Harry Potter books, even before his Death Eater startup really got off the ground, Voldemort decided that he needed to make backups so that he could recover himself if something bad happened. And so that he could survive attempts by other wizards to knock him offline. He did this by creating Horcruxes. Here's how one Hogwarts professor describes Horcruxes. Well, you split your soul, you see, and hide part of it in an object outside the body. Then, even if one's body is attacked or destroyed, one cannot die, for part of the soul remains earthbound and undamaged. Voldemort decided to create 7 Horcruxes because he knew that if someone tried to murder him and knock one of his availability zones offline, he could just fail over to any of the other ones while he resolved the incident. He also decided that these Horcruxes needed to be stored in geographically different places. It would make it more difficult to take all of them out at once. So he went to a lot of effort to ensure that they were placed safely out of the way in a wide range of locations. The main weakness in the Horcrux method, which was the thing ultimately used to destroy Voldemort in the end, is that he used personally relevant information when he created them. He chose artifacts for the Horcruxes that were significant to him and could be identified with some strategic intelligence gathering. This meant that Dumbledore was able to deduce the existence of the Horcruxes and what they were likely to be, and then pass that information on to Harry so he could carry on destroying them. The other problem with Voldemort's system was that despite having mastered the art of monitoring and alerting in his day-to-day operations, he had no alerting on the Horcrux infrastructure. He set up a lot of defenses around the Horcruxes and just assumed that they would defend themselves. This is not a good security posture. So this lack of monitoring and alerting meant that it was easy for Harry and Dumbledore to systematically hunt all the Horcruxes down and destroy them without Voldemort noticing, even though he had alerts going on for all other kinds of important things. But overall, the Horcrux plan worked pretty damn well. It took a team of dedicated opponents a lot of time and effort to find them and destroy them all. Ultimately, the time that Voldemort spent drawing up a disaster recovery plan and creating backups and segregating storage meant that he managed to keep the bare minimum alive and running for 14 years, even after the massive outage he experienced when he tried to kill baby Harry. And eventually, he was able to fully restore from backup at the end of the Goblet of Fire. So my score had 7.5 points out of 10. Good use of disaster recovery, redundancy planning, infrastructure segregation. Monitoring and alerting needs some work. And personal details should not be used as keys to secure important information. All right. So why is Voldemort more thorough at planning defenses than Dumbledore? In the end, Harry Potter and the good guys end up winning against him. But the cost is huge, and the losses are great. Part of why this happens is because Voldemort and his followers are driven by extremely different motivations, and they have different standards of right and wrong than most wizards do. Dumbledore generally just wants to eat sherbet lemons and hang out with his pet phoenix and help young witches and wizards become their best selves. Voldemort wants to start a race war and literally take over the world. He's got goals that most wizards quite reasonably don't, so he's going to consider use cases and methods that most wizards wouldn't in order to get that stuff done. With regard to attacking things, Voldemort tries all kinds of weird, out-of-the-box, often unethical methods for achieving his ends. If you're a wizard who generally wants to do good and make other people happy, getting into the frame of mind of somebody who once tried to murder a baby in cold blood is going to take a bit of work. But it is worth that mental exercise if you want to plan defenses against the kinds of strange and disturbing things that an opponent might actually try to do to get the information that you have, and if you want to understand the things that motivate them. The other reason that Voldemort's defenses are more thorough than Dumbledore's is because Voldemort is a paranoid person who trusts nobody and has no friends. He knows most people are against his plans, and that the only person who's going to help him out is himself, which is why he starts thinking about making Horcruxes while he is still at school. Conversely, Dumbledore leans towards creating groups of confidants and building teams and trusting others with important tasks. There's nothing wrong with wanting to do any of these things. The best places I've ever worked have been on strong teams that trust each other to do the right thing and give each other mutual support. That makes sense. But for your app's outward-facing defenses, you will develop very strong ones if you think that everybody's out to get you. You will plan even better defenses if you can think of the types of groups that might be out to get you and what might motivate them to try and attack you. You'll do even better if you then assign likelihoods to each of these risks and then prioritize defending against them accordingly. Failovers, backups, disaster recovery plans are all the products of worst-case thinking. and we always hope we won't need them. But when we do, we're glad to have them, and we're glad we took the time to think about what to do in a horrible situation. So what about Django? App security is a tricky space, and those of you tasked with defending your apps have an extra hard job trying to anticipate the work of attackers. Luckily for you, because you are now at a Django conference, you already know that there's a framework that helps you get a lot of this stuff right, out of the box. It doesn't take away the need to plan for failure, though, and it doesn't take away the need to think like an attacker, but it gives you most of the right tools to build strong defenses. My expertise is mostly in paranoia and literature about wizards. But for the Django stuff, there are a few places that I want to refer you. James Bennett of the Django security team gave a 3-hour-long tutorial on secure web dev with Django at PyCon North America last year, which covers off a huge amount of very useful practical Django stuff. You can find it on YouTube. I would highly recommend it. Kelsey Gilmore-Innes gave a great talk about threat modeling at DjangoCon US in 2015, which is also on YouTube. Sasha Romain built an excellent tool called Sasha's Pony Checkup that helps you check your Django app for common security-related configuration issues, and it's a really good place to start. You can visit her site at ponycheckup.com and start auditing your own stuff. If you're looking for technical implementation tips from some Django wizards, these ones will set you on a good path. This is the part in the story where the credits start rolling, by the way. Before I wrap up, I want to thank a few folks for their help in making this talk happen. Firstly, for Marcus Holterman, for his advice on Django security measures and for suggesting some good places for research. Secondly, Russell Keith McGee, for developing Podium, which is the software that I'm using to run this presentation. Podium is entirely open source, and it is Python-based. Third, I want to thank 2 excellent women who've brought Harry Potter into technical conference presentations before. Lacey Williams-Henschel presented an Intro to Docker for Djangonauts at DjangoCon Europe earlier this year, for example. This talk gives you a stack of advice about Docker, and it's all dressed up like a Hogwarts Charms class. It's really good. Megan Spear presented an analysis of the password strength of Hogwarts common room passwords at PyCon North America last year. I haven't been able to find this one online. It was a poster, but it was also a great source of inspiration for this. And lastly, I want to thank all of you for coming to my talk and for being part of DjangoCon Australia this year. It was a lot of fun to present this talk for you. I got to wear robes. But if you take one thing out of this talk, just remember to think like Voldemort when you're defending your apps. Have a good evening.
So Lily will be taking curated questions for this session, which means that you lovely people get to run around instead of me. So if you'd like to ask a question, please queue in this aisle here on the right-hand side. As you're doing that, just a reminder that questions should be in the form of questions, which are to ask for information from the speaker. If you would like to share information with the rest of us, the best place for that is probably either at dinner this evening or at the call for proposals for PyCon AU 2019. So if there's any questions, feel free to head up to the aisle here. Oh, Marcus.
How did you manage to actually pronounce the name of you-know-who? How did you get this over your lips?
Well, this isn't a secret, but he's dead now.
Is there any more people heading up for questions? Everyone wants dinner? All right.
Dinner's reasonable.
Before we wrap up,